Right, in this video I'm going to be comparing traditional methodology to agile methodologies. Before watching this, you probably should watch the National 5 traditional methodology video I uploaded, just because it goes over that in quite a lot of detail, whereas this one just compares this with something called agile methodologies. And by the end of the day, you should be able to know the advantages and disadvantages of both the traditional or the waterfall method, as well as agile methodology. So there's nothing really important there. That's just really what I've talked about in the last video. So you go in steps. It's like a waterfall. You go down one at a time. It takes quite a while. The one we want to focus on, or the new one, sorry, is the agile model. Really, they figured that the traditional one was taking too long, so they decided to make a quicker version of it that cuts out some of the bloat, really. So agile methodology uses something called sprints. So when a company is in they might have like a weekly sprint or even a daily sprint, but the idea is that they rush through sort of the same sections, because we've still got analysis, design, implementation, testing, and evaluation, but you'll notice there's no documentation stage here, and that's because the idea of a sprint is just to do it as quickly as possible. Now, whereas the traditional method would go over a long period of time, possibly like a year or more, and you don't move on to the design stage until you finish the analysis stage, and you don't move on to the implementation stage until you finish the design stage. Really, there's a time limit, so maybe they'll say, right, let's plan out a brief problem, right? I'm going to go back to video games because that's quite an easy thing to picture. Let's say they've got a rough idea of the video game, then they go quickly design it. Maybe they spend a day designing it, then they spend a day coding it, then a day testing it, and a day reviewing it. So you could do this in a 5-day work week, spending 1 day on each bit. Now, are you going to have a complete video game by the end? No, you're not. You're going to have a really rubbish video game, but you'll have a prototype at the end that both you and, if you had a client, can see. And that's really important. And then they say, right, when they go back to the analysis stage, well, they've got the review. The next analysis stage just builds on the review, and they say, right, what can we do different? And then they go, say, the next day to their design team, and the design team makes something a little bit different. Their programming team builds on that design, then they test it, and they find any new bugs, and then they go back to the review stage, and the process repeats. Now, it doesn't have to be a week. I'm just saying that because there's 5 stages, and it's easy to think of 5 days, but some companies would do it in a week. And every week, you make a new prototype, and it gets better and better and better. At least that's the idea anyway. So the difference between them, so client interaction, there's different categories you need to know about in regarding to both traditional and agile methodology. So the traditional method has the client involved at the start, so they have it in the analysis stage, and then the end they have it in the evaluation stage, and they are never involved anywhere in the middle. They'll make a software specification again at the start, and then they'll sign it off at the end if they're happy with it. If they're not happy, they go round, but rather than like a week, what we're talking about here, this could take years, months, whatever. Normally, in using the waterfall method, because remember, traditional is just the waterfall method, the goal is the same. You make an analysis stage at a start, and it's still the exact same goal 1 year later. I've already said they'll see if it's fit for purpose. So fit for purpose just means, does it do what it's meant to? And then if they have to redesign it, they will spend another year or whatever doing it. Agile methodology aims to have the client involved throughout the whole process, and because if they make a weekly prototype or whatever, monthly prototype, the client can see those prototypes, and then they can give feedback. So, like, could you imagine if you made a game and you spent a whole year making it, and then the client's just like, nah, don't like it. If you did the agile methodology, then you've only spent a week on it, and you can sort of course correct and see where you've went wrong, or try and make it so that the client likes it. And so they're getting a lot more feedback from the client, and you can change your goals as you go through. Teamwork wise, the traditional method, all their teams, the analyst team, the analyst with the social skills, the designers, the programmers, and so on, they all work quite independent of each other. Now, I should point out, they normally have multiple projects on the go at the same time. It would be stupid for the other 6 teams to be sitting around doing nothing while the analysts work and then the designers work. So normally they have multiple projects to work on. Not really related, just in case you were wondering about that. So yeah, they work quite independently, and they pass on the work. The teams will meet up at the end of each stage, which again, like I said, could be months, and then they'll discuss what needs to be done. So they work in isolation essentially. The Agile method, the teams actually cooperate a lot of the time. There's even a little bit of overlap between the teams themselves. Maybe some people have like roles that can branch out, and the idea behind this is because you've got a project coming out every week, they don't have time just to, well, I'm saying it's every week, but they don't have time. If it was every week, they don't have time to only have a meeting at the end of the day. They're just going to be cooperating constantly and giving each other feedback, which people that use Agile methodology really appreciate because of that. Documentation wise, the traditional method has the software specification at the start, which is legally binding, which is then signed off at the end. They also do a lot of commentary in their programs. Still going to be in the Agile methodology, but just because it takes over such a long period of time, people could leave the job or whatever, and then you need to go back and look at your comments. Whereas Agile methodology, because they're going to have so many prototypes, they don't even think anybody's going to be looking at their prototype code. So I'm sure they'll have some, but not nearly as much as the traditional method. Also, one of the main kind of ideas behind using the Agile methodology is that you don't make a document at the start. I'm sure there's like a little document, you need an agreement, but they don't spend weeks and weeks trying to get the fine details of this document. Maybe it's just a short meeting, and they say, right, what type of software do you want? What type of game do you want? And then they're like, right, we'll get a prototype to you by the end of the week. And that's because nobody really reads the long documents. Like nobody's going to read a 100-page document on what needs to be done. But if you just had a brief specification, then they might work on that. It is reducing documentation, not removing. So there is going to be some, just not very much. You talked about that. Yeah, it just cuts out a lot of the documentation, really. People that use this don't like just making lots of words for no reason and spending lots of time doing it when you could just get on with the project. Also, because the client is there so much, you might find that you don't even need as much documentation because they're giving you feedback, whereas if you're only meeting the client at the start, with a traditional method, they need to give you a lot of information at the start. Right. So, in terms of measurement of progress, it's a strict plan with the waterfall method. You've got to go down in stages. The Agile methodology, we've already talked about it, it's called sprints. They don't have a strict plan, really. Normally they don't even have an end point in goal. They might have a rough timeline in goal in mind, but they won't have an exact timeline. And really their measurement of progress is how fast can they churn out prototypes. That's what they're looking for. Can they get the prototype in by the end of the week, end of the month? And although they might have a rough goal to meet, it's not the end of the world if they don't meet it. Maybe they'll even go beyond it. But yeah, they just kind of play it by ear, really, is what I'm trying to say. Adaptive and predictive. So this one is adaptive. This one is predictive, what we're talking about, and this one is adaptive. Predictive means you plan out everything in excruciating detail at the start. This is the software specification. And the idea is, if you get the analysis stage right, then you won't have problems down the line. Whereas these guys think it doesn't matter if you get the analysis stage slightly rushed, because you're only going to be making a quick prototype anyway. So there's pros and cons for both. And like I said, the further away a date is, the Agile team, they won't even know, like they'll know what they're doing at the end of the week, but they won't know what they're doing at the end of the month, for example, or the end of the year. The year might be a very far off thing to them. Whereas the traditional method, if you wanted to, like, they've got a board of people that will have strict deadlines and this needs to be met and whatever. So this is very well thought out, and this is kind of living in the moment, this one. Testing, well, it's carried out after implementation. Testing is the fourth stage in the waterfall method. We've already covered that. Agile, there's not really much of a phase. I'm sure there's a short phase, but they really just test all the time. Just as soon as the prototype's made, they'll test it immediately. So, and that is everything. Hopefully that clears up the differences between traditional and Agile methodologies. Right, thank you for listening.